Oh hey, in this video I'll be making my very first dining table. And although mistakes were made, and at times I really wanted to, in the end I made it through and the client was thrilled.
Wow, it's so pretty.
One time when I was in guitar building school, an instructor told me, when you're building a guitar, you need to be careful. In fact, the moment you start even thinking about building it, you need to be careful. And that concept really stuck with me. It's something I've held on to for every project I've taken on since. Even when I'm just in the planning stages, just thinking about building something, I must be careful. So not really knowing where to start, I figured I'd use my workbench as a reference point. I also Googled standard table heights and sizes to get a better idea of what the general dimensions should be. Luckily, the client had a pretty clear idea of how long they wanted the table to be, so I was able to use that as a starting point. From there, I could work out a rough ratio from the almighty Google suggestions to figure out the width based on the length they wanted. In the end, the table was 90 inches by 40 inches. The first thing I wanted to do was make a template for the table shape. I did this by cutting out a piece of plywood that was exactly 1/4 section of the table. Then, since this table was going to be a curved shape, I then carefully drew the curve onto that piece of plywood and cut it out on the bandsaw. Then I sanded it smooth with the disc sander and then even more smooth by hand. Next, I took a full sheet of 1/4-inch plywood and drew a center line going in both directions, then traced each section one at a time using the 1/4 section template. This way I knew the curve would be symmetrical all the way around the table. The reason I started with the template was to give myself an idea of exactly how much material I would need as I built the table. It also helped me visualize the whole thing, especially since this was my first time building something like this. I used a jigsaw to cut out the rough shape of the curve at both ends. And then, since I wanted the sides to be perfectly straight, I used my track saw. This helped me make sure each side was exactly parallel with each other. Then, going one section at a time, I brought the template to its final shape using the router. When it came time to mill these boards, they were too long to begin with, so I cut them down to size. Then my initial plan was to joint one edge, which would allow me to then take it to the table saw and cut it to width, but I quickly realized that wasn't going to work. Because these boards were basically the shape of bananas, and it has become increasingly obvious, I can deny it no longer, I am small. Man, you can see all my life decisions passing through my head right here. So off to the hardware store I went, and I got myself an extension for my track saw, which saved me literally years of time. With it, I was able to cut one edge straight, then use my table saw to cut the boards to 6 inches wide. That way they'd fit on my jointer. I also picked up these rollers from Harbor Freight that helped me feed the boards through the jointer. They made it so much easier too. I honestly don't think I weigh enough to have held the boards down without them. But let me tell you, getting these things set up was not a good time. It took me about an hour to get all 4 rollers set to the perfect height, mostly because, of course, the floor wasn't flat or level, but holy dust collection did this make a mess. Once I got them flat on one face, I went ahead and planed them down to thickness. Basically, my goal was to reduce as much weight as possible before I tried to joint one edge. As you can see, my small shop was quickly started to feel even smaller. The lack of space was really starting to get to me, and I was starting to feel overwhelmed at this point. But I pressed on and jointed one edge on each board, then I glued the boards 2 at a time. That way I had less to mess with, and it was easier to keep them as flat as possible. Luckily, the boards came together quite well, so I only had to do a little bit of manipulation. Now, typically, once you joint one edge, you're supposed to run the board through the table saw to make it parallel, but I didn't do that because my saw tends to leave too many marks on the surface. Plus, the boards were already getting pretty close to being too narrow. I was worried I wouldn't make it to 40 inches wide for the total width of the table. So I took the calculated risk of gluing the 2 boards together first, then running them through the jointer again. The boards weren't perfectly parallel in width, but my glue joints turned out great, and visually you can't even tell. Once I had everything glued up, I grabbed my template and a washer to trace a line about 1/8 of an inch outside the edge of the template. Then I took my jigsaw and carefully cut along that line. After that, I taped the template down to the tabletop using carpet tape and clamps to hold it securely in place. Then I used a flush trim router to trim the edges to the template. Since my router bit had bearings on both the top and bottom, I didn't want to take the risk of any blowout, so I flipped the table over, ensuring that I was always routing with the grain, not against it. Because at this point, if I had any chip out, I would have just cried. For this project, I went out and bought myself a Festool sander, and yes, I did spend over $600 on a sander just for this project, but trust me, it was totally worth it. The sander I was using before that was a pneumatic sander, and honestly, I'd probably still be sanding this table today if I had stuck with it. This sander was a total game changer. Definitely one of my most premium tools I own. Once I had it sanded down to 180 grit, I rounded over the edges and filled any remaining cracks with a mix of sawdust and wood glue. Thankfully, all of these were on the bottom side, so I didn't have to worry about them on the top. Next, I moved on to the legs. I started by making a template to give myself an idea of the shape, but then I just used these blocks to figure out the exact angles I needed to cut on each one in order to create the curve I was aiming for. After some trial and error, I landed on a 4-degree angle for the cuts. I then cut about 5 pieces to start and began moving them over, counting how many times I shifted them. This gave me an idea of how many pieces I actually needed. In the end, I needed 18 pieces per leg, so 36 total. Once again, I used my jigsaw to cut the boards down to more manageable lengths, then rough cut them on the table saw, just giving myself some extra room for milling. After that, I jointed one face and one side, then used the planer to bring everything down to its final thickness. Next, I used the cross-cut sled to bring the pieces to their final length. I left them just a little bit long, thinking I'd need to trim the ends after gluing them together, but, well, that turned out to be a decision I came to regret. You'll see more on that later. To cut the angle, I used this jointer sled jig that I made. I also used feather boards to ensure as little movement as possible while running the pieces through. This way the edges were ready to glue as soon as they came off the table saw. The next step was gluing the legs, and this is where I made my first mistake. I didn't think I'd be able to tape everything up on the backside and then flip it all over as one unit without it falling apart. So I decided to tape them up in sections, then glue everything up at once and connect them as they were standing up. And it might have worked if I didn't run out of space on my bench and have to move everything. So at this point I'm panicking. I had to move each piece over, trying to make sure nothing would fall off the table. And then, yeah. Looking back, I probably should have just stopped and reevaluated, but nope. I kept panicking, and this took me about an hour of just pure stress and taping my heart out, hoping I could get this thing to hold together. Now, this was the correct way to do it. For the second leg, I taped everything as one unit, and instead of trying to move it all over at once, I clamped 2 boards to it temporarily like this. Then flipped it over. Super easy, and honestly, I definitely felt like an idiot once I figured that out. And it worked great. I just applied the glue and spread it evenly and brought everything together. Thankfully, it didn't require much pressure, so I just added a few pieces of tape to hold it in place. I ended up with glue everywhere, but it did the job. Moving back to the first leg, most of the joints were good enough for the table since they were just supporting weight vertically. But the main center joint had a big gap, basically daylight showing all the way through, except on one side. To fix that, I used my track saw and carefully matched the angle as best I could. I made several small passes, cutting as deep as I could. I then glued in a wedge to increase the surface area for that joint, hoping it would add strength and prevent it from falling apart later. Once that was done, I used my flush trim saw to cut off the excess. Now right here is where I definitely started regretting making these legs too long. I couldn't think of a better or a safer way to cut them, so I just went for it on the table saw. Basically holding it up, then slowly lowering it over the blade, then shutting it off, moving it a few inches, and rinse and repeat. I just kept going a few inches at a time until I finally had enough room to just push the whole thing through. To get that smooth, rounded shape, I used an angle grinder with a flap sanding disc and just started hogging out all the flat surfaces I could find, basically blending everything together. Once I did that, I grabbed a round over bit and rounded over the ends. Then I had to hand sand the entire inside because the radius was just a little too tight for my fancy new sander that I just bought. So yeah, a lot of sanding involved. To mount the legs, I picked up some hardware that came with this handy little template. I started by drilling 2 holes, then had to switch to a different bit to widen them up just a bit. After that, I added threaded inserts to finish it off. Now the 2 original holes here weren't enough because they were all in the same plane, which caused the legs to rock back and forth. So I did go back and added 8 more screws to each leg, and that made the whole thing much more stable. Once the plates were mounted to the legs, I placed them exactly where they needed to be on the tabletop and traced around them with a pencil. Then, using the same template that came with the mounting hardware, I routed out a recess so the table legs would sit flush against the table. And nice shot of the power cable as it goes in. To drill out the holes for the plates on the table, I first used a brad point bit to get the holes started, then switched to the proper size bit to finish the job. Now this was pretty scary just because I didn't have a whole lot of chance for error. If I drilled too deep, I would have drilled all the way through the table, and believe me, I was definitely terrified of doing so. Next, I had to drill recesses for the screws that mounted the plate to the legs, making sure everything sits nice and flush. And once again, I only had 2 screws drilled at first. I didn't realize how much it would rock until everything was installed the first time. Then of course I had to add my logo to the bottom of the table. There she done. For the finish, I used Rubio Monocoat in cotton white, just like every other YouTuber in the history of forever. But I chose it because it's simple application process. Plus the client specifically asked for something that could easily clean crayon marks off. And there are actually YouTube videos of people testing how well Rubio Monocoat handles that. Plus it's also easy to repair. After that, all that was left was delivering it to the client. Luckily, I got some help from my nephew. All right, Harrison.
Where do you want to grab it?
Basically, we're kind of leaning forward like this. Whoop. Yeah. These are pretty light.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this is going to be fun with the tabletop.
This cover's a little slippery.
Yeah, we might have to take the blanket off for the top.
Like the first one to see.
Yes, you are. What do you think?
Looks a lot better than our old table.
Yeah. Much good.
Oh, my shoe came off.
Oh?
Guess we're going no shoe now.
Alright.
We're gonna have to go up first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Alright. Okay. Careful. Ow.
So I just come up?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And then just get your genuine reaction.
Oh my goodness. Wow. It's so pretty. That's crazy.
All solid wood.
That's nuts. It's perfect. Yay. Come on, guys. No. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Hopefully it works.
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll work.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm hoping to make more content soon, and if you're interested in having me build something for you, head over to my website at ncmguitars.com, where you can find a submission form to get in touch. All right, that's it. Bye.